It's no secret that we live in a world full of a-holes and d-bags. If you've ever gone anywhere or done anything, you've inevitably run into some of these jerks. And one of the worst kind you'll find, both in person and online, is the snob. These are people who think they're better than everyone else for little to no reason. Unfortunately, snobs are as unavoidable in the music world as they are everywhere else. You've got your percussion snobs who will mock you if your kit has even one cymbal that's made by a company other than Zildjian. Piano snobs will dish you unless you've got a full-size Steinway in your living room. There are even DAW snobs that'll tell you your beat sucks because you made it in FL Studio instead of Pro Tools. Though snobbery runs rampant throughout the entire music world, in this video, I'm going to tell you about 5 types of guitar snobs. These insufferable guitarists love getting up on their high horse so they can look down their noses at you. But like the saying goes, the higher you snob, the harder you fall, or whatever. So let's knock these guitar snobs down a few pegs as we examine their snobbish ways. Number 1. Gear snob. A guitarist is only as good as his gear. Or at least, that's what the gear snob would like you to believe. These are guitarists who think they're better than you because they own more expensive gear. They might not know how to use the vast majority of that gear, but they certainly know how to talk about it. Instead of spending time practicing their instrument, gear snobs spend time practicing how to work into any conversation the latest piece of expensive equipment they bought. And they will somehow, no matter how inappropriate, figure out a way to make every conversation about them and their gear. I just got into a fender bender. My neck's a little off. There's nothing off about the maple neck custom American Fender Strat that I just bought. That thing feels great. Though guitarists can get snobby about any gear they bought for their hobby, an expensive guitar is the number one thingamabob that'll really crank up the knob of any gear snob. The more they paid for their overpriced guitar, the more they're going to go overboard overhyping it to you. Now, personally, if I got duped into spending thousands on a guitar that looks, feels, plays, and sounds no better than the one you paid a few $100 for, I wouldn't run around bragging about what a sucker I am. But for some reason, to the gear snob, it seems to be a point of pride letting you know how badly they got ripped off. As the name implies, these guitarists can be snobs about all sorts of gear other than actual guitars, things like amps, pedals, and rack equipment. But it doesn't end there. I've met guitarists who are snobby about their chords, straps, capos, and even guitar picks. If you think you're better than someone else because of a guitar pick, everyone else can tell real quick that the only reason anyone could be such a prick is if they're mad at the world because they have a tiny little dick. The gear snob has one job, to accumulate better equipment than any of their friends. But all their bragging will eventually start dragging that friendship down till it ends. If you've got a friend who's a gear snob, sooner or later, you're going to end up telling him to slob on your knob. Gear snobs brag about their gear because they've got nothing else to brag about. All it takes to be a gear snob is deep pockets and a trip to Guitar Center. Other types of guitar snob actually look down at the gear snob because, unlike him, they couldn't just buy their way to snobbery. They had to actually put in thousands of hours to earn it. Number 2, show-off snob. These guitarists are actually really good, and they're going to let you know it every chance they get. The show-off snob might not have the most expensive guitar, but he doesn't need it. Through sheer will, he's developed the skill to make even a $100 Squire sound like a $1 million bill. On the one hand, you have to give show-off snobs some credit because, unlike the gear snob, they've put thousands of hours of practice into their instrument. On the other hand, there's nothing more frustrating than trying to talk to, jam with, or just be around a show-off snob because they can't go 5 seconds without busting out some crazy lick that you both know is far beyond your skill level. This is what show-off snobs live for, to show you and the rest of the world that they're better than you because they can play things on the guitar that you can't. And in addition to being good guitarists, most show-off snobs are great at playing the skin flute. While you're out having fun, getting laid on Friday and Saturday nights, these snobs stay home all weekend to practice the guitar so they can show you up during the week. Show-off snobs might not have time for much human interaction or even basic communication, but they always make time for some good old masturbation. Whenever these snobs aren't practicing or showing off, odds are they're at home alone jacking off. Fortunately, it's socially unacceptable to show off how good you are at whacking off. If it wasn't, you can bet show-off snobs would be busting nuts in public left and right, showing off their masturbatory skills. But since they can't show you how good they are with a skin flute, they stick to the guitar. Literally if they don't clean up after busting out a quick flute solo. The thought of shaking hands with the show-off snob might make you cringe because you know where those hands have been, but don't worry. The show-off's hands never leave the fretboard long enough for a shake or even a high five. Still, every time the snob cranks the overdrive to show off, you wish he'd drive to off himself because show-off snobs thrive at being some of the most annoying guitarists alive. Number 3, brand snob. This type of guitar snob has a lot in common with the gear snob. But unlike the gear snob, who will look down at you for not wanting to waste lots of money on overpriced equipment like he does, the brand snob will look down at you for owning any guitar that isn't made by his favorite brand. With so many different guitar brands out there, you'd think thered be a lot of variety when it comes to this type of snob. But for some reason, only a couple of guitar brands seem to be capable of inspiring snobbery. You never see a brand snob who's all about Yamahas or Squiers. 9 out of 10 times, it's Gibson. You might occasionally run into like a Paul Reed Smith snob or something, but most brand snobs are Gibson snobs. I mean, it's right there in the name. Rearrange the letters of Gibson, and you get either I Snob G, or the name of Paulie G's snob of a cousin, Snobby G. Nothing gives a Gibson owner a boner like rubbing it in your face that you don't have a Gibson of your own and that you've only ever known your cheap Epiphone. You could point out that your guitar is basically a Gibson clone that has a better tone and at only a fraction of the money blown. The Gibson snob will moan and groan once this has been shown and then hopefully leave you the fuck alone. Though brand snobs tend to focus on guitars, sometimes that brand loyalty extends to amplifiers. Even though I've never personally experienced guitar brand snobbery, probably because I've never owned a super expensive guitar, as much as I hate to admit it, I have experienced a bit of amp snobbery. The second I bought a JCM 2000 half stack, I immediately found myself looking down at every single guitarist I knew whose amp didn't say Marshall on it. It didn't matter that some of them were much better musicians than me. My amp said Marshall on it, and theirs said, well, I don't know what it said because I stopped reading as soon as I realized what it didn't say. Marshall. The one good thing that can be said about brand snobs is that they're loyal. Not to their wives, husbands, boyfriends, girlfriends, children, friends, family, or even to their own core values. But they are loyal to their guitar brand. This makes these insufferable assholes easy to spot, which makes them easy to avoid. If I see a guy wearing a Gibson hat and a Gibson t-shirt, and I ain't talking about Debbie Gibson, with a Gibson guitar he's carrying in a Gibson case, I'll do an about face and with haste run the fuck out that place at a lightning fast pace. The only downside is that I won't get to see the look on the snob's face as I vanish without a trace. Number 4. Vintage snob. These snobs aren't as common as some of the other types, but they're out there. And when I say out there, I don't mean they're around somewhere. I mean mentally, these weirdos are fucking out there. These snobs believe that really old guitars and amps are better than modern ones. And to be fair, some are, but not all of them like the vintage snob insists. Vintage guitar snobs aren't much different than vintage car snobs. The latter will insist that his 1967 GT500 is far superior to any modern GT500. But is it? The 67's got about 350 horsepower, but a 2025 GT500's got over 800. The 2025 also has a lot more torque, not to mention better steering, suspension, and especially brakes. And unlike the 67 Mustang, you don't have to worry about a modern one stalling out on you every 5 minutes. So why the fuck would anyone prefer vintage cars or guitars over modern ones? Well, because vintage stuff can be pretty cool, that's why. But vintage doesn't automatically equal better like the vintage snob would have you believe. Every chance he gets, the vintage snob will go out of his way to tell you why his old-ass, beat-up, shitty-sounding Hondo, Teisco, or Harmony guitar is better than your brand-new Stratocaster. Because they're old. It doesn't matter that your Strat sound, plays, feels, and looks a hell of a lot better than any of his guitars. They're much older than yours, which, to the vintage snob, means they're much better. Perhaps the most annoying thing about the vintage snob is that they'll spend all day and night telling you about how cool their Teisco Spectrum 5 is, but then refuse to let you play it, which is precisely why you should refuse to hang out with these snobs. Well, unless you are one yourself. Then you can get together with other vintage snobs to hype up the shitty, ancient guitars you own, but refuse to let each other touch. Number 5. Technique snob. In some ways, these snobs are the opposite of show-off snobs. Unlike show-off snobs who go out of their way to let you know how skilled they are at the guitar, technique snobs go out of their way to let you know how skilled you aren't. Nothing makes a technique snob happier than to point out every single little mistake you make. The only mistake they won't point out is the mistake you made by agreeing to hang out with a technique snob in the first place. The technique snob thinks it's his job to seek and critique guitarists he perceives as weak. But he doesn't do it to help those guitarists get better. He does it to make himself feel better. Sure, this snob could feel better about his own playing by simply practicing more. But that shit takes time, patience, and persistence. It only takes 2 seconds for a technique snob to point out that you played a wrong chord or that your fingering is all fucked up. And by making you feel a little worse about your playing, the technique snob makes himself feel a lot better about his playing. Now, I'm not talking about guitar instructors teaching their students about proper technique. That's literally their job. Nor am I talking about the guitar virtuoso who applauds your rendition of Paganini's Fifth but points out the one arpeggio that was just a little off in an attempt to help you out. I'm talking about the dude down the street who's only been playing the guitar for like 2 weeks longer than you, yet feels the need to critique every single fucking note you play. When I run into one of these assholes, I like to have a little fun with them. You want to critique my guitar technique? Then I'll critique your critique technique. You should be barring that whole chord. It'll sound fuller. You should be talking more from the diaphragm. Your voice will sound fuller and not so fucking shrill. Your fingering is wrong. Your pointer finger should be on D, and your middle finger should be on C. Just so I understand. D, C. Got it. I'm not saying technique isn't important, especially when it comes to playing more advanced stuff. But with the guitar, the only thing that really matters is how it sounds and how it makes the listener feel, not how it's played. The only ones who care are technique snobs who can't get laid. And there you have it. 5 different types of guitar snobs. But I'm sure I missed some. In the comments, tell me about other types of guitar snobs that you've encountered, or might even be yourself. Snobs are everywhere. These assholes are unavoidable in the music world. Genre snobs will tell you what types of music you should and shouldn't listen to. Style snobs will tell you that your mohawk isn't punk rock enough and needs to be another 6 inches tall. There's no shortage of snobby snobs engaging in their snobbish ways. But I'm going to hit you with some real snob psychology, or snobology as it's typically called by absolutely no one. Rearrange the letters in snob and what do you get? No BS. So I'm going to give you the no bullshit truth about snobs. But I gotta warn you, it ain't funny. It's just plain sad. People who constantly feel the need to look down at others and offer them unhelpful, unsolicited criticism are miserable on the inside. Happy, confident, well-adjusted people don't go around being snobs. They go around trying to pick people up and make them feel better. Losers with no self-esteem who can't stand themselves make up the snobs of the world. No matter how cocky these snobs might pretend to be on the outside, I promise on the inside they're insecure pussies who think so little of themselves that the only way to temporarily feel better is to drag someone else down by being a snob to them. Remember that the next time you run into a guitar snob. As they're laying into you for playing a chord wrong or using a guitar that isn't made by Gibson, try not to let it bother you. Just remind yourself that all guitar snobs are pathetic losers with no balls, no class, and who often tend to not have even a single friend. Though I wouldn't recommend trying to befriend a guitar snob, hopefully now you can defend against the snobbery they send. When they realize they can no longer offend you, they'll intend to upend from you to descend on a new guitarist to whom they can snobbishly condescend. And now your guitar snob troubles have finally come to an end.
You're so annoying.
If you like this shirt, it's available in lots of sizes and colors at MusicBSharp.com along with lots of other funny music-related merch. Link in the description. If you want access to special episodes of MusicBSharp, like the best music to listen to while high as fuck, visit my Patreon page where you can find exclusive content, get early access to regular videos, and more. Link also in the description. And if you'd like to hear some of my music, click that link in the description or search for this dude on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever else you listen to music.